So we've learned about the player class and an enemy class and how to add our player to the screen. In this lesson, we're going to add a custom event to add sprites to our game screen so that they appear at set intervals. Let's create a new REPL and name it PGD13 Custom Events. So in order to have a fun game, we want our enemies to appear at regular intervals. How could we do that? So in the game loop, there's already code that handles random events for key down or quit. It's called the event loop. The event loop is designed to look for random events occurring every frame and then deal with them appropriately. Lucky for us, PyGame lets us define our own events. We're going to do this in 3 steps. The first step is creating a new enemy. Let's create a custom event that's generated every few seconds. Call it add enemy. Now, make the event unique. PyGames defines events internally as integers, so we defined a new event with a unique integer. The last event PyGame reserves is called user event. So defining add enemy equals pygame.userEvent +1 ensures it's unique. Oh, make sure to add +1 to it. Now we need to add this new event at regular intervals throughout the game. Let's set our event to go off every 250 milliseconds using the setTimer method from the PyGame library. Here's the syntax. All right, let's add it to the program. You call setTimer outside the game loop since you only need one timer, but it will fire throughout the entire game. Here's what you should have in your editor. Looking good. So we have 1, we created a custom event, add enemy, and then 2, made it unique, and finally 3, defined it to trigger at set intervals every 250 milliseconds. We now need to integrate it into the main loop of our game. So what's the best way to do that? Well, the simplest way to include the event is to add it to the conditional statement already in the main loop. Find the elif inside the main loop. Remember that the while loop will continue running and running until running is equal to false, at which point the loop ends. To include the new event, please add another elif that checks if the event type is equal to add enemy. Whenever the event handler sees the new add enemy event, it creates an enemy and adds it to the enemies and all sprites group. Since we added enemy to the all sprites group, it'll get drawn every frame. So here's a question for you. What have we forgotten? You also need to call enemies update, which updates everything in enemies to ensure they move properly. Here's the complete main loop after adding the new event. All right, any questions, ask your instructor. If not, let's move on to collision detection. The design for our game calls for the game to end whenever an enemy collides with our player. Checking for collision, it's a pretty basic technique of game programming and usually requires a lot of math to determine whether 2 sprites will overlap. This is where a framework like PyGame comes in handy. Writing collision detection code is very tedious, but PyGame has a lot of collision detection methods for you to use. For collision, you'll use a method called spriteCollideAny. This method accepts a sprite and a group as parameters. It looks at every object in the group and checks if its rect intersects with the rect of the sprite. We use a conditional statement to remove the player if the method returns false, indicating a collision. We remove the player by using the kill statement when the if statement returns false. Once the player's been killed, you still need to exit the game. To do this, set running to false to end the game loop. All right, see you again soon.